Hello and welcome to the Recreation to Recreation podcast, the show where we explore the stories of people who have turned the activity that they love into positive change for our world. My name is Jen, and I'll be your sidekick on this adventure as we treasure hunt for gems of insight and wisdom while exploring the planet with our inspiring guests. For today's adventure, we're heading to Nova Scotia with Hope to explore her world of wildlife, rehabilitation, and commitment to care. Hi, Hope.
Hi.
It's so great to be here with you today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our talk.
Me too. And before we get into it, I always like to start these conversations with an invitation for you to tell us where you are, what it's like there, just get us situated in your world.
Sure. I'm in Seaforth, Nova Scotia. It's a beautiful little part of Canada on the Atlantic Ocean, and I can look out my balcony window and see the ocean. So it's really a beautiful setting here, and it's where Hope for Wildlife exists. The we call it the farm, for lack of a better word.
That's lovely. Amazing. I'm a geographer, so whenever I hear someone's environment, I'm like, okay, now I can picture where she is. After we get situated, I like to ask sort of some weird and wonderful questions. These really don't have anything to do with anything. I just find them really fun. And they usually bring out some cool things, and they're an opportunity for us to just get to know you a little better. So I hope you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Okay. So if you could be any age for the rest of your life, which would you choose?
I think my 40s and 50s was a good time in my life when I think back and base it on my life, and I guess that's all I have to look back at, and I think it was a very, very good time of my life, although I've enjoyed every step of the way. I find certain years were more difficult. I think everybody in their teens and early 20s have a difficult journey because they've got so much to learn and to find themselves, and, sometimes even into your 30s, you haven't quite figured out a lot of the direction you wanna go. I found in my life, the 40s and 50s were amazing, and I built friendships, and I took steps forward that felt good for me, and so it was a really good time of my life. So I guess that would be a good time to return to.
I love that. And as someone who's heading towards her 40s, I'm excited to hear that. And yes, I would agree with you. I think that if I reflect back on my teens, 20s, and 30s, it's just a time of storming. And it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to just let yourself go through those motions. And it's okay to have times like that in all decades. There's just no rule book for how it's supposed to go.
Yeah, and even in my 60s now, I love this time of my life, but I do find physically it's a little more demanding, and, that's why I picked a little bit younger than what I am now.
What does your perfect day look like?
Oh, I live perfect days all the time. I really am blessed and happy with my path I've chosen. So, my life that I live every day since I started Home for Wildlife, at least, has been a chosen path. I want to be here. I want to be doing this. And every day is different in my world. So I get up, I live at Hope for Wildlife. So, and I like that. Some people say, don't you ever just want to be away? And in all honesty, no, I love people. I love people knocking on my door every 10 minutes. I like the buzz and the excitement. I like knowing what's going on. Every day is different here, but it's a mix of problems and things breaking down and people calling in sick for work and injured animals and talking to the public. And every day encompasses a whole bunch of different things. And I really like that.
I think if you design a life that you don't have to escape from, you're winning. Beautiful to hear. Lovely. When do you feel the most stressed?
Sometimes my life is very hectic, and what stresses me the most, I think, is when I've upset somebody, or somebody is sees something that they don't like that might have happened at Hope for Wildlife, or they misunderstand a circumstance, and it really stresses me because I think, oh no, that wasn't meant that way, let me explain. And a perfect example would be, like, we've had a TV show for a while now, and When people see some of the really old shows, we were just beginning. And it started in the 90s. So a lot wasn't known about wildlife rehabilitation. So it was a new science. We were making mistakes, but we were doing what we were taught. And it's kind of like human medicine. Look how far that's come. So, we would do things the way that we were trained to do. And now, many, many years later, people will watch some of those old shows and I'll get kind of hate mail or upset, like, why did you do that? And I'll say, well, I'm 65 years old. And back when I was doing this, we were sort of the founders. We were the beginning and we were learning each and every day. And because of somebody starting and progressing, we've come to the point where we know you don't glue a turtle shell together, you wire it together and let it grow back together. But when we started out, we were taught glue it back together, give them a long-term antibiotic and get that animal back out to the wild. And now we know that that's incorrect. But of course, when people see that, they're quick to judge. So I think that's one of the hardest things, like explaining to people, where those bad moments come from, how that was just part of our world then, and how we learned and got better at what we do and progressed each and every day. We learn something new every day about our world.
Yeah, such a nice thing to actually reflect on because I think when people reach out like that, I can imagine that would be quite upsetting. And I think that's a hard thing for anybody is to feel misunderstood. And the fact that you've had your life and your work captured on film, so it's out there for all to see. I mean, everybody thinks they want to be famous, but I think there's some really tricky parts of, being out there in the public eye for that long a period that there is lots of learning moments that can be taken out of context or seen in a way that are deemed, unethical or something like that. However, when people reach out to you, it's such a cool invitation for you to encourage them to see it that way too and say, hey, we're actually all learning. I'm sure there's times in your life too where you look back and go, oof, I too have made, many decisions that were perhaps not great, or with hindsight, I could have done it better. And I think that's just really important for people to hear is like, we're not here to just get it right all the time. We're actually here to just keep learning. So, another one, do you cry easily?
Hmm. Sometimes I cry at the most unexpected things that even surprise myself. When I'm faced with a really difficult thing, like a death of a patient that we've been working on for a long time, I tend to be pretty solid, but sometimes I'm watching a really corny show at the end of a day and I'll cry. So it's really weird. I think about that often. We've all been through great traumas, tragedies, and it's surprising when it crops up. Like I could be doing something perfectly normal and then an old memory will come and it will bring tears for sure.
I do cry quite easily. And I cry when I tell happy stories.
Me too.
There are times when I'm actually very stoic and calm and collected, especially if it's under emergencies and things like that. I tend to feel that way. But in conversation, when someone else is emoting or we're just reflecting on a memory or something like that. And I remember when I did my death doula training, I asked them, I said, does being a crier mean that I can't do this job? She talked about the fact that no, being connected in this way and showing emotion is such a powerful thing to share between people. And I would think in the line of work that you do too, this is emotional work. This is about life. It's about protecting life and helping it thrive and survive in some cases. She told me something that made me laugh, which actually gave me a lot of permission to cry because I think that sometimes we can feel like crying is a sign of weakness or people are going to judge us if we're crying or whatever story you're telling yourself. And she said, when it's about someone else's sorrow, if you're the loudest person in the room or they have to turn around and comfort you, you might want to rethink your choices. Showing emotion is a really important part of life, and it's how we connect. There's something beautiful about emotion that allows us to connect on a deeper level when words just can't cover it.
Mhm. I agree. I always say if something doesn't make you laugh or cry, then it's not special. Like laughter and tears are just the most amazing part of what life has to offer in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. Okay, two more. What is one thing you think is really overrated?
There's a few, but one thing I think I am so disconnected with the world of stars and TV and all of that, and even sports to a degree. My life has taken me on a far different path. And although it's all good, I just find not that these people aren't accomplished and have done beautiful things and should be respected, but I just find sometimes we misplace where we put our worship or our strength. We give perhaps too much to these people that are doing their dream. Good for them, but any more important than the person that's the doctor or the people that are fighting for human rights or there's so many amazing charities out there that I just sometimes we misplace our gratitude, I think, at times. I just wonder why we tend to be drawn to the flamboyant and the exciting and maybe not so much to those that are going through struggles and pain and trying to make the world a better place. I just sometimes wonder about that.
I echo that sentiment actually, and I think that you described it quite well. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast is because these are people that I'm interviewing that people probably have never heard of, and yet they're doing really wonderful, inspiring things with their life, and they don't have to be these sort of like big, loud things. They can be the everyday little choices that are making ripples in their world, and then that's gonna spread out even further, and I think there's just space for different types of conversation and the recognition of different types of contribution to the world. So I'm picking up what you're putting down, Hope. So, last one before we get into our actual interview, but who was your favorite teacher and why?
Oh, I had a couple, probably 3 that come to mind, and one, I think the subject was amazing, geometry, my first year of geometry in grade 10, and he just delivered it in such a beautiful way. He was personable, I felt connected to him. He actually would look you in the eye and tell you stories, and it was just this lovely relationship, and my English teacher in grade 11, she was the same. She was someone that you could relate to and understand and share things with and discuss. I think when you're young, you don't often have the opportunity to have a mentor or someone that you can bounce ideas off of, someone that you see every day, but someone in a more professional setting. All of my teachers I liked for that reason. They opened up, let us interact in not just the teacher and the student kind of way.
It's a nice question because I think it helps us to reflect on the fact that there are so many different types of teachers as well. As we get older, we become teachers ourselves in many ways. And I know that you've stepped into that role for sure. It's always something good to think on so that we can bring that forward with us and say, okay, and what were those things that actually made me feel really connected and comfortable to ask questions? And then we can, emulate that as we go forward into our lives as we step into different roles ourselves. So, I really appreciate just going right back to the very beginning, if you're willing to do so. I like to start right from day dot, telling us a little bit more about where life began for you and were the passions that you have now and the way that you've sort of followed this through line of helping wildlife. Was that something that was there from the very start?
Absolutely. I mean, I grew up in a small fishing village in a little place called Argyle. It was far from any town. I wouldn't have said we were poor, but looking back, we'd probably, in today's standard, we'd definitely be considered poor. And we had our big vegetable garden, and my dad was one of the few that wasn't a fisherman in the community, but he would help out the fishermen. Grew up on the ocean, swimming in the ocean every day, running the roads on your bicycle and never home until supper time. That kind of free, independent lifestyle, which sadly can't really exist in the world today. And I was just free to roam the brooks and the streams and the railroad tracks and hang out with my friends. And in the summer, it was just do things outside. You never spent time indoors in the summer. That's how I grew up with that kind of lifestyle. I loved every minute of it. And I think it did lead me definitely to be more connected with my natural world. I loved it back then. I love it now. I just feel there's so much to be learned. I was incredibly shy. Would hardly ever look anybody in the eye, wouldn't carry on much of a conversation until my late teens, really. I was very, very shy. And so I connected in a different way. I connected with the world around me and nature and things like that. So I carry that forward, not knowing really, when you're trying to figure out what to do with your life, well, there's nothing I can do with that other than I love my time outside and with nature, and I understand it and I studied it at a very young age. It was a difficult path for me to figure out what to do with my life. We didn't have a lot of money, so I knew university would be very, very difficult for me. Although, you start working, when you're 12 or 13 to save money. And then I decided to go to a business college and study accounting. Even to this day, I love accounting. People laugh when they hear that.
Nice.
And it's a big part of my life. Running Hope for Wildlife, I have to have a very good understanding of the financial world. And so I studied accounting, and then I studied my CGA, and then I went on to become a CVPM, which is a certified veterinary practice manager. So all of those paths work well for Hope for Wildlife. Really wasn't planned. It just sort of all come together, all the pieces for some very strange reason. And I feel I never say no to an opportunity when things come up. Oh yeah, let's try that. Let's see what that's like. Even though it might go against advice, but I like to try new things, and I always left the door open for those opportunities.
Mm. I think that's something that's so important for people to hear is that it's not this step by step process that one thing, specifically leads to another. It's really just sort of allowing things to flow out naturally and staying open to those opportunities. How would you reflect on being able to trust yourself to take opportunities and to make decisions that when you really don't know what's on the other side? Like where does that come from, that courage to do that?
Yeah, it's funny because through my whole life, like things would crop up, and I even remember back when the TV show started, I was approached and asked if I'd like to do this, and of course, I love people's opinions, and I would ask, "What do you think? Should I do this?" And everybody said, "Don't do it. It's a really choice. All your mistakes are going to be on TV forever." And I still did it, and I just thought, you know what? This sounds great. It could possibly educate people about our natural world. This is part of what I want to do. Why wouldn't I? Yes, and yes, my mistakes have gone down on the TV show forever and ever. I'm okay with that. I really am. The older I get, the more I realize your mistakes make you what you are. And that's how you learn and grow and get better. So when I'm interviewing young people, I always ask, tell me about a mistake you've made in your life and how that went for you and what you learned from it. And it's really nice to hear what people say and how it does make them stronger and smarter. Just being willing to be open. I don't think being shy and quiet necessarily means anything other than you got to listen a lot. You got to hear a lot of what's going around you. You weren't always in the thick of it, but you would keep your ears and eyes opened.
Mm. I'm just thinking about the trajectory of going from being, shy and quiet to having your TV show. I'm just thinking of any listeners out there who might be in that sort of shy and quiet stage, but feel like they do have things to say and things to share. Was there sort of like a light bulb moment where you all of a sudden felt a little bit more confident to be out there? Was there an event that happened, or was it just a slow burn?
Slow burn, but I think sometimes shy and quiet people are misunderstood. It's not necessarily confidence. I just think they don't want to go there, or they would prefer to listen and grow that way. They speak when spoken to, but I just think it's just a different way of behavior to be that kind of person. Sometimes now I think, oh, I talk too much. I really should go back to what I was like when I was young. I think the more passion and love you have for something, the more it opens you up. If you were asking me political questions right now or something that I knew very little about, I would be nervous and very quiet. But when you're asked about your passion and what you've grown and developed, then it's so much easier to talk about it and you want to share it because you loved the path that you took.
Absolutely. I've lived my life kind of the opposite in that I was, like, really, really social, and then the last few years, I've been, like, entering into solitude a lot more and learning to become very comfortable with that and with silence and listening, and my mom always jokes, she's like, "You were such a present kid." You know, you were just there and you were involved. I think there's things that I missed by not being so observational, by always being in the conversation rather than sitting back and listening. And it's not to say that one is better or worse than the other, they're just different ways of being, and I think that we come in and out of them too, as you said, depending on what we're talking about. If we're talking about something we're really passionate about, we're gonna be like, "Okay, I'm open and I'm sharing and I'm maybe gonna be a little bit more loud about this," and then other times there might be a time to sit back.
I think we need to be both kinds of people now that I'm older. And they both have their place, don't they?
Absolutely. So I'd love to return back to what you were saying in terms of just because you choose one path, it doesn't negate you then doing something completely different later. And in fact, everything that you do becomes transferable skills that can be useful because obviously we know you as Hope for Wildlife.
Yeah, exactly. Because in my younger days, I was a real entrepreneur and I wanted started all kinds of new businesses, which was so much fun and so challenging. Some failed, some succeeded. But it wasn't until I took a job in the late 80s, I think it was, at Dartmouth Veterinary Hospital. And I sort of blame them for it all. Because I went to work there and as the manager of a veterinary hospital. And the front desk would get calls like a bird just hit my window. What do I do? And they knew I knew a lot about nature. So they just continuously pass all those phone calls over to me. My cat just brought a squirrel home. What should I do? I just hit a skunk with my car. What do I do? So that's where it's sort of all the pieces started to come together. Before then, I was still involved in nature, but not so much Hope for Wildlife. So I decided that, there was a need. There was a real need here for these injured animals that had the misfortune of colliding with humans and that we had a responsibility to try and fix what we could. And I'm a big believer it's all the little things that make the difference. If you have this big vision and you hope to get there quickly, I just never work that way. I just say this one thing at a time. And when I started, thank heavens for Dartmouth Vet Hospital where I worked, the doctors, my bosses, just said, "Oh, bring it in, we'll look at it." And what started as like 30 or 40 critters a year quickly turned into thousands. Right now, we do close to 7,000 animals each and every year. So it was funny because for the first 5 or 10 years, Dartmouth Vet would say, "So we decided we had a meeting with the partners, and we're gonna support you in your wildlife world for another year." And they just kept doing that, and it just kept growing, and they gave a lot of time and money and donation to help it be. And then one year they said, this is coming, right, Hope? Like, this is too big for us." So, and that sort of, I still work there, but I started to get a hospital up and going here at Hope for Wildlife. And it just took a life of its own. As the steps came, I knew what I had to do to make them happen and successful. So sometimes when people come, they say, "Oh, so much has changed. You got so much done." But to me, it's just my day to day life. And I don't even see the changes because they're just small little changes every day. And before you know it, things have really grown and become the dream.
So amazing to reflect back on the people and places that support you along the way as well, right? Blame/gratitude for encouraging you and supporting you along this path to be able to support that many lives. I just really had to sit back and even think about that number, right? We're so quick when we hear numbers like that to be like, "Oh yeah, that's a lot." When I actually like breathe that in and think about there are no words for it, actually. So I would love to know from your side, that impacts me, when I think about it. And as you said, you're in it, it's every day. Are there times at which you feel maybe that same type of overwhelm when you think about the sheer number? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
Yes, many times you feel a little panicked inside. I think, "Oh, I must like it or else I wouldn't be doing it." So I think it's kind of like what I need to be a happy person is to have all that coming at me. And, there's days in the summer where they'll say, Hope, we don't have any more room. Where are we going to put this animal? What do we do? Like, there's too many coming in. And I can remember one of my first few years, I had a young lady working for me for the summer. I just had one person helping. And the raccoons just kept coming in, the raccoon babies. And I just kept handing her another case of raccoon. And she just looked at me one day with tears in her eyes. And she said, Hope, when do they stop coming? And I realized then, because I'd lived it on my own for so long, I didn't see it through her eyes as just being very new at this, and just the sheer numbers, the sheer enormity of what we're offering, and it's life or death. It does take a while to adjust to that kind of life, I think. And we always say we sort of know when a volunteer comes in whether they're going to be there for a few weeks or they're going to be lifers, because you just see it in them. It's not only about healing the animals, it's about healing the people. And some of these people have been with me 25 years and they'll never go. They'll just keep on helping and doing what we do. The volunteers they're here. They're like rock hard, solid. Whereas other people like the interns will come and go and still be a part of it. But the volunteers are what makes this place what it is.
Mhm. It makes me reflect on, so I've been highly involved in sort of environmental care for a long time and done a lot of science communication around, my focus has been on plastics and water, and obviously the impact that that has on wildlife and the bigger picture. And one of the things that really has kind of percolated in my understanding of sort of human environment interaction is that if we're not connected to the places that we live in and the other beings that are there, we're not going to be motivated to protect them or to care for them. So I'd love to just hear for you some of your reflections on how do we facilitate connection? And do you believe that too? Is that something that sort of fits within your experience of the world? If we allow people to have this sort of firsthand connection, that the care does blossom in its own way.
Yeah, for those that don't realize that that's my whole mission, reconnecting people to their natural world in a positive way. And everything you said there is exactly what I believe so strongly. I just think we've strayed so far, and we see it in our teaching. I always say we do three things. We do education, rehabilitation, and scientific research. But the education is what's going to facilitate the biggest change in our natural world. It's going to connect people, take them from a state of not understanding, not knowing, not caring. You can't care for something unless you understand it. So, our biggest job, and what I focus on the most, is that reconnection of people to the natural world. I hate how we've strayed. I love talking to my grandparents back when they were alive and just understanding how they treated nature. If you trapped and hunted, as most did, and you trapped a mother and saw the babies, that trapper would usually take those babies home, raise them up, and put them back into our natural world. We need a healthy ecosystem. We need to sustain it. We need to care about it. And I just think in the world today, we've stepped to this place where, which I hate hearing, is leave nature alone, let nature thrive, leave it alone. I beg to differ. I totally disagree with that logic. We negatively impact nature every single day by building our buildings, driving our cars, deforestation and fragmentation. So we need to positively give back. So if I'm presented with an injured wild animal that perhaps was an act of nature, maybe a big storm blew in, and I'm still going to help it and get it back out into the wild. Because why is it okay to negatively impact nature every day and not do our fair share to correct what is happening? And I just feel, because people don't understand, like, I love giving talks on how to live comfortably with coyotes, or what do you do when you see a black bear in the woods, because people have lost that understanding. So I love data, I love science. And that is a great way to reconnect them, telling what actions they need to do, what's going to help their natural world. And there's so many hundreds of different things that humans can do. And they're just little tiny things, as is everything, that make a huge impact, because it just adds up over time. So reconnecting people, We are just another animal. And I see it every day in the work that I do when I study the animals that I have in my care and how intelligent and totally amazing they are in every way, in different ways. How have we built ourselves up to think that we are separate from wildlife? Because we're just another species. We're just a part of that. And we're so connected to it. And if we look after it, it will look after us. So we really need to start thinking that way.
There's so much in there. I could go like maybe 6 different directions with what you said. One of the things that you referred to there was with regards to education. When you were speaking about bears and coyotes, I also live in a rural location here in Ontario, and coyotes are definitely very prominent and a big part of our lives. I listen to them every night. But I think that there's an element here of fear and misunderstanding and disconnection. I think those are the sort of 3 things that come forward when I think about people's relationship with the environment. If they don't have that knowledge and understanding at their fingertips, and they have created a life where they do feel separate from nature, whether that's through inherited narratives and beliefs or through maybe some scary experiences. I think there's space to be cognizant of that as well. But it's nice to hear that you're out there doing education about that piece. Is that something that you talk about? Is fear? Does that come into the conversation?
It does. And what I run into the most, fear is definitely one of the things because they're fearful for their pets, they're fearful for themselves. But when you break it down and equate it to getting in a car and driving to the city, your chances of an accident or getting killed in a car accident are far greater. When I was doing my research on the coyotes, I went back since the beginning of time when media would cover things such as a coyote death in all of North America. Since the beginning of when they recorded this kind of thing, there was only ever been 2 reported deaths by coyote. One of them was in Nova Scotia, sadly. But when you look at that same data in North America, there are over 5,000 people killed every year by their pet dog. So it's just, how did we get that disconnected that we would actually have a call for a species that is needed in our ecosystem, in our biodiversity? One thing I see all the time, like even with my own neighbors, they call me every year and say, Hope, there's a lot of geese around this year. Is that your fault? Like, insinuating that I release geese here, I don't, but the geese multiply very quickly. So, and then the next week I might get a call from a neighbor about the coyote and they want it gone. And I'm like, well, by shooting the coyote, you now have more geese because the coyotes will clean up the eggs, they'll keep populations in check. So it's that part that's missing in our thinking that we need to reintroduce. It's something that old timers knew and understood far better than we do today. And that every act we take against a living thing has a negative impact on us too. So even if you want to put it in a more selfish term, you want less than 100 geese on your lake, then don't be killing the predators that are going to help us with that problem. It truly works well as a system. Nature is just so brilliant. And if we would let it be to balance itself, things would be so much better for the humans. I remember asking old farmers how they dealt with animals coming in and hurting their crops. And they said, oh, we used to just put a pile of food about 500 yards from the fields, and those critters would just fill up on that food and never touch our gardens. And I said, oh, okay, you did. So it's just so much can be learned. Yeah.
When you mentioned that statistic about coyote attack and death versus pet dog, well, we were talking about it already, which is our separation from nature. And I would be interested to hear your thoughts because when I talk about the environment and I go and do presentations, especially in schools, I find really interesting because I'll say to them, especially on the notion of care, caring for things, the way that we feel connected to things, the importance we place on them, and then therefore the actions we're going to take to care for them. I always sort of say, what's the difference between your own backyard, your community, and the world? What changes along the way when we think about care and caring for them? And I always talk about pets because that's something that's relatable for a lot of kids that have pets at home or their friends have pets and they feel very connected to them. They're part of their family. The death of them really affects you the same as any kind of loss or grief. I say, what's the difference between the pet that lives in your home and the animals that live in your backyard and then the animals that live in, your community and the animals that live out in the world? I think that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. To be fair, there's a lot happening in the world right now. There's a lot happening in our everyday lives. They're full of too much information, not enough reflection, not enough quiet. And so I just love to hear from your side. You obviously talked about education, but how do you encourage people in their daily life to sort of take that step back and say, "Oh, this is important to me. I want to actually look at this."
I think it's difficult, but as often as you can to share with the public, engage them in conversation, find out why they're disconnecting, and present it in a way that might be more palatable for them. People don't like nature to encroach on their home, which I find very strange because you got your small percentage of people that really do encourage, enjoy having to share their space with nature. So, I'm always trying to, when people come and visit here at Hope for Wildlife, I'll say, Aren't the grounds beautiful? And they always say, Yes, it's so beautiful here. And I said, Guess how much time I spend mowing? And they say, Probably none. You've got no grass. And I said, Exactly. A grass is like a desert for a wild animal. And everything you see here means that there's a lot of nature right here, but it's not bothering me. I'm enjoying it. It's giving them a safe haven to hide under, to be a part of. You got your pond, you got your bushes, you got your indigenous plants. You've got everything you need for a healthy ecosystem. And it's no bother to me. It's a good relationship. I'm enjoying it. The animals are enjoying it. So I think just trying to get these concepts through to people that it's okay to share our space with nature. Nothing terrible is going to happen, as long as you keep your home in good repair, keep your garbage under control, don't be feeding them, but just enjoy them in their natural way. Plant bushes that have berries and that kind of thing. So do your part to make nature complete instead of making it like a desert with just an acre of green grass that you mow every day, every week. Just finding those simple little things that are pretty easy for humans to change their ways in, and just trying to get people to think a little bit differently about nature in general, even when it's in direct contact with them, and that,
Mhm.
the benefits of having the healthy ecosystem on your property.
Mhm. And I think too, it's like I always joke about the Great Lakes. I'm like, they don't know there's a border there. The water doesn't care that we've drawn a line on a map. And the same for, our backyards and our communities. It's like the animals, they don't know what a fence is apart from that it's in the way of them moving from place to place to find food or shelter or things like that. So how can we start to understand like, okay, yes, this is my backyard, but it's a part of something bigger. And I think that if I reflect on my environmental work over the last 16 years, I think that a lot of the narratives around nature and the environment have been very scary. And so people can tend to disconnect because it's overwhelming to think about all the changes that are happening. And it doesn't feel like there's anything that I can do. I think there's a lot of narratives about individual powerlessness to make change. And so I just love that, what you're focusing on is the real sort of individual conversational. These are things that you can do every day, and they actually do make such a big difference. If we can all care for our own little slice of paradise, the world would be a very, very different place.
Yeah, I don't think many good charities out there would exist today if it wasn't for the thinking of a little bit by a little bit. And that's what makes a difference. And I know personally some charities that have started up after them understanding that concept. Don't ever look at that big picture at the very end. Just look at small little changes. And it makes a world of difference to getting things done, to fulfilling your dream, your passion. And don't ever let anybody say, well, what difference does that make? That one little act makes a huge difference. It really does. And we need to focus on supporting each other, letting people know that the little things are what really count.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And listening to you talk about your land and the water on it and the sort of safe haven that it is for wildlife, I'd love to hear about how that the farm, how did it come about? What were the steps towards you finding this particular place that became, the home to so many animals as well as you and your volunteers? I'd love to hear more about that.
And it did sort of go through a number of different steps. At first, I started Hope for Wildlife in a very busy community. It was actually in Eastern Passage and lots of military people coming in and out. And I had a very small little piece of land. That didn't work so well, but it was a good starting point. I remember when the first skunk sprayed, I think that's when the walls started crashing in, and I knew the neighbors aren't going to tolerate this more than once or twice. So I moved from there to a little place out in Seaforth, not far from where I am now. And it was a few acres. It was all I could afford. It was an old rundown trailer. And I bought it and I fixed it up. And I remember asking my dad, I'm going to buy this. What do you think? And he just looked at me and he said, You're not going to take my advice. Why did you ask me? Because I like to ask people.
Mhm,
And when it was all said and done, he came to visit and he said it was quite lovely and that he was wrong and that it did turn out quite nice.
mhm.
So I fixed that up but I soon outgrew that too. And just around the corner from there was an old farm and I just knocked on people's doors and I knocked on this gentleman's door and he said, No, no, I never want to sell. I love it here. And 2 years later, he called me up one Friday night and he said, I'm ready to sell. Come on over. And I zipped over there and I signed on the dotted line and then I just started growing it from here. It really is the perfect location because it's close to a city, which is where a lot of conflict happens. But we do the whole province. Now we have triage clinics in Cape Breton and in the South Shore and the Valley. So these animals can come in and get first aid care, pain meds. They can get warmed up, they can get their fluids, and then they're able to make the rest of the transition here to Hope for Wildlife. So it's really now grown into all of Nova Scotia, and we're able to get those animals in and stable and to a care facility. And it helps with education too, just people knowing, oh, I know there's a place right up the road. I just hit this animal. I can zip that there. Maybe they can do something for it. People want to help. And I think that's such a good thing. And, when I hear the stories of people trying to make pets out of wildlife, I think, you know what? I'd rather a person with that kind of mentality than other things that I've seen with shot animals and poisoned animals and sticky traps and all that kind of thing. So I think the hill you want to climb or the hill you want to make the change with, you should think about carefully and try and get those really important things changed.
I was thinking about how lucky Nova Scotia is to have you because here in Ontario, where I live, there aren't very easily accessible locations for this type of thing. I've come across, injured animals on the land and water where I live, and it's about a 3.5 hour drive to the closest place, which is worth it, and I've done it. But I know that a lot of people wouldn't make that effort to drive that far for an injured animal. So maybe their response would be far more likely to, well, just put it out of its misery rather than, oh, maybe there's an opportunity for it to actually have a life beyond this injury or this instance. And I've also been that person who's driven the animal all the way there and it had no other option than to be put down. But it's just so heartening to hear that people in Nova Scotia have this network of places to go. And I would love to see that. I'm not saying that you have to do it by any means because you have enough on your plate, but I imagine that your story is very inspiring for other people across Canada and beyond who, want to do something like this to see that you are succeeding. That, yes, it's taken a lot of work and it's built up slowly, slowly, but it is possible. What does an actual rescue and rehabilitation look like from start to finish?
I created an app where we put the word out to all Nova Scotians, join our app. And what that does is every time the phone rings, we take the call. And if it might be a bird just hit my window, what do I do? And I tell them, put it in a little box. Can you bring it to us? And I tell them where the drop offs are. And they say, no, I don't have a vehicle. So then we have over 250 that have joined this app, and we post it up. And when they signed up, they said, hey, if anything comes in my community, like a 50-mile radius, it will ding their phone and they'll go gather it and get it to one of our triage centers. So we have built this network of Nova Scotians that help in the process. And we couldn't do it without them. And so, on a sunny, hot summer day, we might get 200 calls on injured wild animals, and we post them up. They all get picked up and brought into us. Sometimes the caller brings them into us. Like we might say, hey, there's 20 pickups ahead of you. Would you be able to bring it? And sometimes people can, and sometimes people can't. And so we have this network of getting them all in, and then we can start the treatment and the triage. But just the act of doing this, I think, shows people that it's okay to care again, and that we do have a responsibility if we've caused these problems to fix them. I think the act of rehab sends the positive message that we need to look after our natural world.
Mhm. And so once those animals arrive with you, what does that look like?
So it's really neat. We have a little drop off at the end of our driveway. There's always someone working there, or they ring the doorbell at 2 in the morning and I come running, or one of our workers do. And then it is assessed. It's taken up to what we call ICU, which is a group of registered vet techs or well trained people, and they assess it. If it's an emergency and we can see the animal is dying, it goes straight to our hospital. But it usually goes up to ICU first, where it's stabilized, and then the veterinarian, we have a veterinarian that comes in 5 days a week that she works here, but she's on call and would always help us when needed. The next morning, if it needs full x-rays, blood work, lead testing, all those things to find out what's wrong, if it isn't obvious, or what can we fix this and get this animal back out to the wild, those decisions are made, and surgery can happen right away or in a couple of days. And then once the surgery is done, it goes back up to ICU, where it might have physiotherapy, it might have bandage changes, it might need drugs every day to help with pain and healing. And once the intensive care is done, that animal moves to the second stage of rehab, which is if it's smaller, it still needs more care. If it's a baby and still needs growing up, it will go to another district where another whole group of people are, their specialty is the care and the feeding and the husbandry and the enrichment. And then the third and final step is getting them outside to great big units where they can almost be like they're in the wild, but not, because they're still contained. And then, of course, the fourth step is getting them back to their natural world.
Wow. There must be quite a few people involved in this.
There is a lot. I'm just working on my summer schedule. In the summer, it can take like 200 people just here at the farm. Different shifts, of course, because we're open 24 hours a day. People only work 7-hour shifts, although they do drag into 8 or 9 in the busy summer. So imagine staffing all of that. And then you need to staff each district of the farm. So we have our medical teams, we have our husbandry teams, we have our feeding teams, and we could have 1,000 animals on the farm in the summer that need hand feeding and care. So it takes a city. It really takes a wonderful group of people. And we get them from all over the world. We get interns from Europe, and, we've had them from Hungary. We've had them from Thailand. We've had them from everywhere you can name. Like, it's really quite amazing, the people that show up and come and want to be a part of it. So it's, thank heavens. I don't know what we do without our interns, but we get through it.
When you think about the fact that you've built this up from, thinking about that first call that you got when you were at Dartmouth, and now you're here with all of these people supporting something that you've created from scratch, what does that bring up for you?
In some ways, it's the best part of Hope for Wildlife. It's bringing all these like-minded people together, and they can share a love and a passion and when you share, it grows. So even though I know a lot of them are here for the short term and then they're on their way again to follow whatever dream, I know for a fact that a lot of them turn to studies in the environmental field, becoming veterinarians or doing something for nature. So I know it has an effect to send them out into the world to realize that they can make a living and do something that they're passionate about, and that will help. There's a lot of people that want to serve, and to me, Hope for Wildlife is just, it started as to serve our community, to fill a need that I saw, And so it's serving the wildlife, it's serving the people, it's serving the community, it's serving scientists. There's so much that we discover here because we're the front line. We saw the first case of avian flu several years ago. It was a Canada goose, and it was the first one in Nova Scotia that tested positive. We were also the first facility in Nova Scotia that tested positive on fox pups. And it's just so interesting to see how these diseases affect birds different from mammals. And then birds, they usually pass away. Mammals, we can work them through it, and some can survive. And we've actually done research on the blood after they've lived through H5N1 virus, and you see where they're building up immunities against this virus. So we are just another mammal, just another part of the ecosystem. So all this knowledge is helpful for every part of our earth. So it really does serve a really good purpose to our scientists, to our community, to our farmers.
One of the things that comes up for me is just reflecting on these animals have gone through traumatic things. And when it comes to rehabilitation, I'm curious. Well, I think about how we deal with trauma as humans. There's so many different parts to that journey of healing, for want of a more encompassing word. Are there complexities to this that you make space for, like you would with a human, but with an animal? I think that maybe one of the reasons why we feel not as connected to animals or certain animals as we do to others is that we don't give them enough credit for how intelligent they are, how they see the world and conceive the world. Is that something that you bring into the rehabilitation? I don't even know what that looks like. And I'm just curious, how do you emotionally support an
Exactly. And we
animal?
do everything you say is so true. They are as complex as we are as humans. Like we see it and we know that stress, just our voices, our touch could actually kill an animal from capture myopathy or just can't take the fear that we evoke in them. So we do have to be very careful because it's our nature to want to nurture, and these animals don't want to be talked to. They don't want to be touched. They are fearful of us. So understanding that is the first step. We have signs all over our facility, quiet zone, quiet zone. We don't want them to die of stress, and I'm sure some do. But the other thing I've seen over the years is they're so similar. You could take 100 crows, say we get 100 crows in one summer to rehabilitate, treat them all the same, put them through the exact same program, feed them the same diet, give them the same habitat, give them the same enrichment. At the end of that 100 days, you're going to have one that's just a little too friendly. And I said, "Oh, what are we doing wrong? We've got to, we shouldn't have any." And I realized that if you put 100 people in a room and spent 3 months with them, there'd be one or two that would be the incredibly friendly ones. And so they have personalities. They have, some experience fear in a different way than others. Some are easygoing. Some are like, you can almost see them think, well, this isn't so bad after all. I'm getting hand-fed mice here and I'm not humanizing them. I'm not doing that. I see their intelligence and I see there's so many emotions that go through them. And I see them build a trust. In some cases, most not so much. But like the deer, for example, are very gentle animals. And when they're fawns, once they get through the initial fear of us, like we don't want to imprint them, we don't want them to be comfortable with them, but once they know, oh, we're going to give them nice tasting milk, it's a different story on the way they behave toward us. And then once they have each other, they totally forget about us. They're with their family unit, they've created their herd, they don't need us. I think parents could learn from the way they raise their babies and how that all works. There's so many lessons that we can learn from how nature deals with their family units. I think it's
Mhm.
fascinating.
Thank you for rolling with my not so eloquent question, but it was just really wonderful to hear your reflections on that because and important not to humanize them, but to recognize them for what they are. And
Pretty
their
amazing.
yes, and just their sort of intrinsic value on this planet in every shape and form and what they bring to the ecosystem and they bring to our lives and then therefore how do we care for them in return. And you actually said one of my favorite phrases, which was our nature to nurture, and recognizing just as you're talking about what's appropriate for nurturing an animal, it's the same for each other. We make assumptions based on what we would want if we were in distress, or the ways that we would bring comfort to ourselves. And then we assume that that's going to be the same for everyone. And so I think it's just maybe there's a deeper invitation here to get a little bit more curious about what other people, the planet, and animals need when it actually comes to their care and our care of each other. So that was a really interesting piece of conversation to listen to. I'm going to have to listen back to that. Thank you for your openness and willingness to answer it. So, one of the things that I'd love to hear and for our listeners to hear, because if there is someone listening who has clicked on this because they are dreaming of opening their own wildlife rehabilitation center, or they're wondering how they can best support somewhere locally, we've talked about building it up slowly, step by step, following the flow. But if they're sitting at home and they just don't even know where to begin, they didn't fall into it, I guess, like you did in terms of getting those calls and having them passed on to you. What would be your advice to somebody who, and doesn't just apply for the rehabilitation idea, but just in terms of, you talked about being an entrepreneur. What do those first stages need from someone, and let that transition towards wanting to make a dream a reality a little bit more easeful and a little bit less terrifying?
It's such a good question because there's so much to learn about this world. So, number one, I don't think anybody should get into wildlife rehabilitation unless they spent a summer working at a wildlife rehab center. And that's going to really tell them a lot. It's not for everybody. And until you live it and experience it, you're not going to know if it's for you. You may love animals, you may care about them deeply, you might love, there's thousands of ways to help. And wildlife rehab is one way. And I don't doubt there's people out there that want to do it and they should do it. It's probably perfect for them. But go and spend 12 to 16 weeks at a wildlife rehab center, learn it from the ground up. And number two, people will say to me all the time, "Oh, I'm so jealous. I wished I could do what you do." That bothers me because of course you can. And I've said that back. Well, why? What's stopping you? And they say, "Oh, I don't have any money." Well, I didn't have any money either. I worked 3 jobs at certain points just to get enough money to buy a piece of land, to start working really, really hard. If you want it, you'll find a way to make it happen. So people that say, "Oh, I'd love to do what you do," don't really mean that, or they would. And so I think you've got to have that passion, that desire, and that hard work ethic to get through it and get it going. So making sure you know what you're getting into and spending some time at a rehab and just having that really strong desire and not let things stop you. Like everybody's going to tell you no. You just got to say, "Oh, no, this is what I want to do. I know I can do it." And you'll see, have faith and strength in your desire to do your dream. Following your dream sounds so cliche, and I don't really like it because it's so much more than that. It's really the hard work it's going to take to get there.
Mhm. There's a couple of things that came up there for me. I think about one of the inspirations behind this whole podcast was talking to people who have turned their passions into meaningful ways of living their lives. And you've mentioned it a couple of times now, but it's other people's opinions. And we're pack animals for the most part in terms of, our well being and our sense of self is in relationship to our sense of community and belonging and the value of others. And from the sounds of it, you have a very healthy approach and attitude towards balancing what you want to do with other people's opinions. And you were talking about your dad. He already knew you were going to do it anyway, but you still asked for his opinion. And I think that there's times where we can have really unhealthy relationships with other people's opinions coming maybe from our own insecurities, but there's so many different dynamics to why and when and how we ask for opinions of others. And I would love to just have you reflect a little bit more on that to understand from your side, how do you have such a healthy relationship with that?
I think it's helped me so much in so many ways. Like even now, when I get my group of year round people together and I have a problem, have you ever been in a situation where you kind of have your thought process on what the answer should be. And but so does everybody else around the table. And the power of putting those all together, you change your way of thinking and you come up with something even better. It's not that you did it, it's a group of people around the table that did it. It's such a gift to gather people together and ask their opinions because then you can grow on your thought process. You can grow on the way you think about things. And sure, you might leave with nothing better than what you already thought, but you might leave with something 10 times better than you thought. It's happened so many times in my life. And I love just understanding how other people's brains work and why they think the way they do. I love it. I never get tired of it. I never get angry if someone's opinion is totally different than mine. I try and understand. To me, it's always balancing it out. I'm this way and you're this way. Isn't that interesting? Not like, how dare you be wrong? Because it's not wrong. It's just different. And I just welcome it. I look for it every day. There's hardly a day goes by that I'm not asking somebody what they think.
Mm. And have you always felt that way? Because I was thinking about people who maybe have parents that have very strong opinions about what direction their life should go. From the sounds of it, I'm not going to make any assumptions, but it sounds like you either had parents that were very supportive of you kind of going out and doing your thing. It takes a lot of, I think, self awareness and self confidence to be able to be open to other people's opinion in a way that I just wanna understand you, right? Like, I don't think that always comes so naturally to people depending on their different walks of life. I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to do and to aim for, and I'm just wondering if that's something that always came naturally to you, or were there times where you had to sort of practice stepping into your own confidence and saying, "Okay, well, regardless of whether I ask for their opinions, my opinion is quote unquote safe because I know myself, but I'm open to change." It's a really cool dynamic. I think it's something that we don't talk about a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And you're right, like that my parents were amazing. They weren't so much teachers as I watched their behavior, and they were just so real. And they worked so hard for everything they got, and they bettered themselves, and they went on and studied and went after their dreams. So it was just a true testament of what you can do if you really want something. So growing up in that environment was lovely. And I have to say, we disagree just like any teenager and adult would, but they let me, I mean, I left home when I was 16 to college. And so you grew up quicker back then. So it was different. And you're on your own 2 feet. I remember I bought my first house. I was 19 and it was $32,000 for a 3-bedroom bungalow. And my mortgage payment was $232 a month. So my world growing up, I feel sorry for young people today. Like they've really got it hard. Like it's very difficult. Now I've lost track of your original question. I got
No,
totally
that's okay.
sidetracked.
No, I think it was actually very appropriate. My question was just about
Standing up.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
comfort and confidence to trust yourself to not only say, "Okay, well, this is my opinion right now." It's not threatened by being asked other people's opinions because I know myself, but
Mhm.
I'm also open and willing to change. And I think in the global environment that we're in, where it's like separation is such a key word right now for the way that we're dealing with a lot of things. It's the way we deal with the environment, it's the way we're dealing with each other. I do think that there are significant moves back towards connection, and that's very heartening, and I hold on to that quite closely, because I think they're reminders in a world that could be quite scary right now. You telling me about, buying your first house is a step along the way
Oh,
of finding your self-confidence and your ability to believe in yourself and say, "Okay, well, regardless of what the cost was, that's still an outgoing cost every month that you have to make." It's like,
mhm.
that's a very tangible step
Yeah.
towards building confidence.
Yeah, it's so true. And, I can remember growing up, I had a real interest in real estate. And I remember at 22 or something going to do a bank and wanting to buy a 9-unit building. And the bank manager at the time just said, "Dear, do you really know what you're getting into?" I said, "Yes, I want to do this. I've thought about it." Believing in yourself. And the other thing is, I always say to myself, what's the worst thing that can happen? Am I going to do harm to anybody? Is this going to be harmful in any way? And if the answer to that's no, then do you think this could possibly work? Yes. Do you think it's a good path? Yes. And just go for it. Don't be scared of failing. I've failed so many times, but that's how, again, it's okay. It's a good way to progress and learn what works and what doesn't. How else are you going to learn?
Mhm. I think I've shifted a lot of my understanding of the words mistake
Mm.
and failure.
Yeah, yeah, those are
You know? They're
bad adjectives. It's
well,
just
they're
a
just
learning experience that didn't turn out the way you anticipated it.
100%. They just those words are in our
I like
current understanding of them are limiting. And so it's just really nice to hear a positive reflection on both of these things because are they really ever a mistake? Are they ever really a failure? I too have set up businesses that failed, others that succeeded wildly and closed them because of other circumstance. Every piece, the same as you doing your accountancy and then realizing, wow, like I'm better able to run my business because of this. I don't know if there's really any like wrong paths. I do think that the question that you asked of yourself is key. When I'm making this decision, am I negatively impacting myself, other people, the world around me? And if the answer to any of them is yes, then take a beat, take a
Mhm.
pause and revisit what your options are, your opportunities are.
I think too, setting up a key thing like a mission statement for Hope for Wildlife. Whenever I get into difficulty or having a hard time making up my mind on a difficult situation, I'll go back to that mission and say, does this represent, does doing this act, making this decision to go forward with this, does it represent my mission? Is this what I want to be doing? And it's helped me so many times to come up with the right
Mm.
answers, at least to keep true to my mission at Hope for Wildlife.
Mm. It makes me wonder if we should all be doing that as like individuals too.
Mm,
Am I in keeping with who I feel like I actually am and how I wanna show up in the world?
mhm.
Um, I wanted to also share with you that how I came to know about you was through a family friend who I see now reflecting back he passed away in August, and I see now reflecting back on his life that he was a big inspiration for me in terms of he followed his passions. He did million different things, similar in terms of looking at failure and mistakes as in a different perspective, different light. And he supported a lot of people who were living their passions. And one of the charities that he supported was yours.
Mm.
So I was hoping we were gonna be able to have this conversation and he was gonna be able to listen to it.
Oh, why do you say so? Oh,
But, as much as there's sadness in that statement, there's also just so much joy that even though he's not here to listen to it through headphones, this conversation exists because of him. And so, in my own way, I'm dedicating this episode to Brooke. I just wanted to share that with you because it also highlights that people from across Canada and across the world can support what you're doing and feel extremely passionate about it.
I had a special patient. It was one I did totally myself. It was a baby otter, and it had been thrown out into a ditch at like 3 weeks old and was brought in. They thought it was a rat until I got it. And I nursed it in my home for the first 18 months to rehab an otter. And I let him go on a soft release right here. And I hadn't seen him for the last 6 months. And about a week ago, he turned up here again, went to the drop off door, kind of wiped his paw across the window, and then went into his old sleeping area. He's the most amazing animal. His name was Brooke. The only Brooke I've ever had.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was like 2 years old now, and he even brought home a mate. The other day we saw two otters out on the ice. No otter would go up on our deck and put his paw up to the door. Like it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is so cool.
I know, I know. So when you said Brooke, I was like, "Oh." Nice connection.
That's
Yeah,
a lovely connection. Thank you for
yeah.
sharing that with me. I would love to hear from your side how people can support Hope for Wildlife, because I like to think of donating as a little bit wider. Like there's the financial donation, there's the action of actually going to help or whether that's going and helping you as a volunteer or an intern, but maybe it's also finding somewhere more locally if that's more appropriate or affordable. Our voice. What can we do when we are speaking about wildlife, when we're speaking about Hope for Wildlife? What does that look like? So, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit with us about how we support, what that looks like.
There's so many things in that question. I mean, number one is just being a good steward of our natural world and caring and reconnecting. I think that's the most important thing any of us can do, and trying to spread that thought process around and stand up for the natural world. Be willing to say, no, no, we can get help, or we shouldn't probably be doing this in our yard because that poison's going to kill a whole lot of animals. And, just practicing what we preach a little bit. So that's a huge thing because no matter where I go in the world, the reason animals are in trouble are the same. Human impact of moving into their territory, lack of habitat, fragmentation, poisons, wildlife as pets, hit by cars. Endangered species usually result from all the same things. So we can all be responsible. We can all help. Something more personal. I love it when people come here. Sometimes people just want to come for a few weeks. It's not always easy to make that happen, but we do try and get people in to experience what it's like firsthand to help injured wildlife. And I love being able to share that. So that's another important way. Donations, running a charity is not easy. And when we do get money in, I think one of the most surprising ways is when we get a bequest in a will. It was funny. There was a wonderful gentleman from Ontario, and he called me, I guess it would be back 10 years ago now. And we had this great half-hour conversation. So what do you do? Do you take a paycheck from Hope for Wildlife? I said, no, I don't. I've never taken a paycheck, and I never want to. Nothing wrong with taking a paycheck, but I just didn't want that kind of relationship with this charity. And he asked me how much we spend on administration, and I think it was like 2 or 3%, and it hasn't changed much from then to now. And we chatted, and just before I hung up on the phone with this gentleman called, Mitch Fenton was his name, and he said, "So what can I do to help?" And I usually say something like, "Oh, we need money for gloves and masks and cracked corn," and that kind of thing. But for some weird reason, because we'd had such a good talk, I said, we need a digital x-ray machine. And he said, done. And I said, oh, wait a minute. They're like $90,000. And I had a check in the mail the following week for $90,000. So it just shows you how many amazing people are out there. And then a year later, he calls me back and said, let's do another project. Let's do something really big this time. And I'm like, a digital x-ray wasn't big. And he helped me build Fenton Farmhouse. So it just blows my mind, even today, to think that there's someone out there that cared that much just by feeling connected and wanted to do something to help. Like, to me, yes, there's a lot of negative in the world, but there's so much positive, and I think we need to really look for that, especially with the way things are and the way the world is today. So I'm very lucky. I get to see the good in people a lot. And, there's just so many ways to help. And the money goes directly to the animals. Sometimes it goes to the people that I need to pay to care for the animals. And I used to be embarrassed to say that, but not anymore. To run an organization properly, you need good people. It's
Mhm.
really about investing in the people that come here and give their heart and soul. They work so hard. And, I always want to be able to give them more. It's terrible, what I have to pay them because of making ends meet and that kind of thing. But to me, that's such a good place to put the money in these caring individuals that want to make the life better for this animal and to get it back out to the wild world and care about it. So there's just so many ways, and some of the money goes into our education programs. We go into the schools at least 2 to 3 times a week and all that kind of thing. So it's never ending. It's like this big list, just like any business. Even though we're a charity, we still have all those needs that a business would have and all those responsibilities and obligations to meet. So it's the scariest part of what I do, trying to make ends meet. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And like I was reflecting before on the fact that you've created this from scratch and you've had all of these volunteers and interns gathering around you and believing in what you're doing. And then to have that, it's almost like having circles of care, right? So you're right here in the middle with your animals. And then you've got this first level, which is your volunteers and your interns and staff. And then you go out one more level, and that's where we as the wider world can hold you and support you. And it's really wonderful when we talk about the impact that we can have on the world. I like to think of that ripple effect and
Mhm.
how we're all connected. We have opportunities every day to choose what the impact is going to be of that day from my standpoint out onto the world and what I get back in return. Beautiful to reflect on the fact that you've done that. You've created this whole movement of people that isn't just about what you do there on the farm day to day, but it's also about how we can all feel more connected to the world, more connected to each other, and all of the beings that share this backyard of planet Earth. And so I just want to share my gratitude for all that you're doing. I think it's bigger maybe than you realize, but I think you do realize it. I think it's important to just let you know that from my perspective of being connected to you from a friend of mine who was very passionate about what you're doing, even that just short hop to then this conversation, we just never know where it's going to go and how it's going to affect the world in a positive way. So I just always like to reflect on those things because I think that they help us not just in times of challenge, but all the time. We don't have to be in challenging times to reflect on all the good that's happening too.
It's so true, and right back to you and what you do, and it's really about the community, isn't it? It's about your part, our part, everybody's part that we play, and, just the simplest things can have the hugest effects. It's truly amazing.
Mhm. So I have one final question,
Mhm.
and this is actually the only question that I ask that's the same for everyone.
Um,
So, I hope you saw it in the email because I do like to give people a chance to no?
I
Okay,
don't think
perfect.
I did it.
Well,
Here goes nothing.
the good news is that you've been, able to answer every question so far, so I have every confidence that you will be okay. You can also say no. You can also say, "You know what? I don't feel like answering it." I like to give people that option too, but this is one of my favorite questions. So, what do you think is the meaning and purpose of life, the universe, and everything?
That's quite a question. I think it's to give back, to be a servant, to serve the people, to be kind and caring. I think that's what we're here to do. I really do. And we all do in different ways. It might be through music, it might be through education, it might be through there's so many different ways to give. I do feel the earth can only benefit as we give and share.
That's so beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time today, Hope. I really enjoyed this conversation.
And same to you. I just had a wonderful time. And if you're ever in Nova Scotia, you do need to come visit me.
I would love that.
I'll give you a private tour behind the scenes.
Oh, I would be honored.
Okay.
Thank you. This month's recreation donation is in support of Hope for Wildlife. As you now know from exploring with Hope and I in this episode, this is a charitable wildlife rehabilitation and education organization that she began in 1997. They have rescued, rehabilitated, and released over 90,000 injured and orphaned wild animals, representing over 250 species. They are dedicated to continuing the care they provide, as well as connecting people to wildlife through knowledge and understanding. They do this by welcoming thousands of visitors to their facility in Nova Scotia each year, continuing to share their story through their TV program, as well as delivering educational presentations to schools and community groups. Whether you can volunteer your time, money, or your voice, we hope you'll head over to our website to find out the different ways that you can support their unique version of recreation for the world. Please take the time to let us know what the stories we explored in this episode meant to you. And if you do take action to support this month's cause, thank you. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Recreation to Recreation. If you or someone you know has a unique and inspiring story to tell, make sure to reach out so we can share it with the world. Until next time, keep experiencing, keep expanding, and keep exploring.